Welcome to Affinity Groups, creating a space for self-advocacy for Muslim/Arab female students. I am all about this topic. I want to learn not only more about affinity groups, but how to create those spaces for self-advocacy and more about my Muslim/Arab female students, the differences and all of those good things. So I am all about this topic and I'm all ready to go. So what we are going to do at this point is, who are you, woman? Well, I'm Dr. Desiree Alexander. I'm the founder CEO of Educator Alexander Consulting, and I am going to be your host today. Hello. And these are all of the ways that you can contact me. If you're watching the YouTube video, the resource for today will be in the description. So right underneath the video, you can find in the details the resource for today. So what is next? Last Tuesday, we have the first session in our Minecraft education series. Next Tuesday is session number 2. So if you're like, Desiree, I want to come to session number 2. I didn't know. Oh, no. That's okay. Go watch the video for session number 1 because they've already started building. So go watch the video, get caught up, and then come join us on June 13th, this Tuesday coming up from 6 to 7 Central Time. Then we have school leadership next weekend by the amazing Dr. Amanda Austin is going to come tell us, hey, if you want to move into school leadership, what are some things you need to think about? Then we have ISTE. Woohoo! So ISTE is coming up. These are all of my different sessions and things that I will be helping and doing. You can find the times and the locations at alex.net/events, including 2 free book signings. Check those out. Okay. Saturday, July 1st, we have Shift the Mood of Your Classroom by Becoming Trauma Informed. Then we have July 8th, Digital Footprint. What is it, what it isn't, and how to use it. Then we have the Transformative Educational Leadership Program. If you're in the state of Louisiana and you want to become certified in educational leadership, definitely look into this program. We have information sessions. The next one is June 19th. So keep that in mind. But the application is due August 15th. Then we have NFTS in education. What do we need to know? So all of these AI topics that you keep hearing about, and you're like, what is all this stuff? Come find out. Rochelle has done 50,000 webinars for us. Anytime we have any kind of AI stuff, she's the one. So come and find out. Then we have the Smart Way to Write IEP goals and objectives, which we all should be, doing if we have any SPED students in our classroom. So learn the smart ways to do that. Then we have creating equity through the arts. So if not just if you're an art teacher, but anybody can create equity through the arts. So you want to come and learn how to do that in September. And then we have showcasing your wins, celebrating your success within your community. So we do all these wonderful things at our school, but we're not promoting them, right? And then other people take it and say like, your school is this and your school is that. And we don't show them all the awesome things that we're doing. So come learn how to showcase your wins September 30th. And then we have strengthening your math engagement with Desmos. So you may be using Desmos already, or you may be like, you know what? I want to get into this Desmos, but I just come find out how to make your math interactive and engaging using Desmos. And then we have learning in the Metroverse. So that's another AI term that we hear floating around. And we're like, I don't know what this Metroverse thing is. Come learn and find out November 4th. And then we have voice, value, and validation, a whole paradigm shift in education when we are amplifying our students' voices or making sure that they feel valued and validated. How do we do that? How do we shift that paradigm? We're going to learn from Karen Gray, Dr. Karen Gray, on December 2nd. Then we have one more session that we're playing right now. I think it's on December 9th. So y'all, we are full for 2023. So if you ever want to tell us what you want to learn in 2024, go ahead and put it on this link. If you want to present something, if you want to learn a certain topic, let us know. And then we always have our self-paced classes that you can sign up for anytime for different types of test prep and things like that. Whew. I know y'all like, oh my goodness, that was a lot of stuff. But you know what? All of these educators come together to do it for you, right? They're all doing it for free. They're all doing it for you. So definitely register, show up, and learn some stuff. But I felt like I should have some music right here. This is what you came here for. So I'm going to be quiet and we're going to go ahead and learn about affinity groups and affinity spaces.
Good afternoon, I would say, or maybe good morning, wherever you're tuning in from. Thank you, Dr. Alexander, for giving me this opportunity. And wow, that's a lot of great stuff that's coming up. So I hope I can tune in, and if not, I'll definitely see it on the YouTube. Before I begin, there's a little QR code on each slide. That is a link to my link tree, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but that's where you can find more information. So if you would like to click on that QR code, feel free, and you'll learn a little bit more about me. Today, our session is Affinity Groups, creating a space of self-advocacy for Arab and Muslim female students. My name is Abeer Shinnawi, and I'm representing Educator Education Consulting. And there is a method to my madness, as I say, as to why I specifically chose Arab and Muslim female students and why in an affinity group, and that's what we will be discussing today. I know we have land acknowledgements, which I think are brilliant. I haven't mastered those yet, but what I would like to start as a trend is actually a Muslim American acknowledgement. As a Muslim American, and I don't think a lot of people, even within our own communities, know this, but I want to honor the Muslims who came before me, especially those who were enslaved Africans who came against their will, who were part of royalty, who had extreme skill sets and were enslaved for their particular skill sets, who had come across the ocean in the horrific transatlantic slave trade. And when they did come here, they held steadfast to their faith, and they were the ones who paved the road for the current Muslim American communities we have today. So I want to give my acknowledgement, and I want to honor those enslaved Africans who were Muslim who came before me and who set the path to what later on becomes the civil rights movement and the foundation of American Muslim communities in the country. And it was not my people who are Arabs, where people think that we are the ones who started it. They are not. So I want to pay homage to the Muslims who came before me and who actually paved the road for me to be here and be able to do what I'm doing. Like I said, you can find me at Linktree. I find this is very easy because I can put any publications, any websites, anything that I've done into, a one-stop shop. We have so many different things that are going on for me. I believe this is much easier for myself to kind of maintain and control, but also if you want to learn more about who I am, what I do, what I've done, you can use this QR code. That's also the link right there. And this slide deck is in the link tree. So if you want to refer to it later on, you are more than welcome to do so. And it has my contact information. So please feel free to reach out to me. I love being a thought partner and getting to know educators and community members as well. Everybody who would like to, just discuss topics of like-minded people. So a little bit about me, my life in images. So I kind of find this image pretentious because it seems kind of, haughty, and it kind of gives me a Game of Thrones vibe, but I really love this picture because I have a friend who's a photographer, a wonderful photographer, and had to do a piece for NPR. And this is during COVID, and she wanted to do a piece of women in color who are making changes in the community, and she highlighted me. So this is the picture she took of me, and I really love it for the fact that my friend chose me, and she took the picture with me, and it's also honoring my roots wearing the traditional, what we call a thobe. But my life in images, I'm a very visual person. So I thought, what better way to tell you a little bit about myself than with images? I am a social studies middle school teacher. I am one of those people. Yes, I love middle school. I also believe strongly in the fact that middle school students tend to get shafted. We spend so much time with elementary students because they're so cute and they still adore you and they want to be with you, and we spend so much time with them. And then we go to high school, we're spending a lot of time with athletics, we're spending a lot of time with college prep, we're spending a lot of time with helping them grow and become these adults that they become later. We tend to forget about middle school children because, their hormones are raging, they've got attitudes, they don't know how to articulate themselves, their bodies are changing, so they don't even know how to react to that. But that's where we really get them. And I enjoyed my time as a middle school teacher because I watched and I saw them grow. And a great example I've seen before that I like to talk about middle schools, we can never judge students and who they are in middle school. It's like the concept of Malcolm X. Look at the transformation he made. If we want to judge him at when he was prior to him becoming Muslim, I don't think anybody would have honored his legacy. And that's similar to middle school students. We shouldn't judge them at who they are when they're at that age. It's actually the best time for us to spend time with them to help them develop who they are. As a middle school teacher, I am a history geek. I'm a certified history geek. Yes, I love history. And this is such a great thing about me. I may start talking about history. I always do. My good friend, Dr. Sosan Jabba, sent me a DM the other day about French fries. And I went off on this tangent and told her about the history of French fries. So that may happen to you. And it's going to happen in the session. So consider yourself warned. If you know anything about this type of these type of buildings in this neighborhood, this is a very common Chicago bungalow, a very common Chicago apartment complex. And I grew up on the south side of Chicago. If you know anything about Chicagoans, we are very, very particular about our geographic setting. But I am a South Sider at heart. My family still lives there. Like I said in the chat, I am a transplant to Maryland, but I grew up on the south side of Chicago, which makes me a huge Chicago Bears fan. If you are a Packers fan, I apologize. But if not, I'm a huge sports fan, especially basketball and football. When I was growing up, the Chicago Bulls were big. So you have to kind of be a sports fan if you are a Chicagoan. But I try to do at least one home game with my brother. It's become a tradition. Whether they're good or not, I will always be a diehard Bears fan. I'm a child of immigrants. My parents are Palestinian. They came here in the late 60s. And me being a child of immigrants is what shaped who I am as a person, what I do for my advocacy work as well. But I'm also a sneakerhead. I love this picture, which is from Hanan's Corner. I give her homage in another image that I put, but I do love sneakers. So I love this image because it shows a little bit about my personality, but also who I am as well. I am fluent in Arabic and in English. I say I'm fluent in 3 languages, sarcasm, but not everybody can understand that one. My parents spoke to us in Arabic. I try to do the same thing with my daughters. It's a beautiful language, and I'm very fortunate that I can read it and speak it. I am a mother as well. I'm a mother of 3 girls, and that's another reason why I kind of gravitate towards girls. I'm biased, but there are other reasons as well. And my husband and I have been together for a very long time, but this is a picture of my oldest daughter getting her master's in social work, and then my other 2 daughters as well. And finally, yes, I am the founder and the CEO of Abeer Education Consulting. This consulting came out of a need while I worked for a large school district in Baltimore County. I realized that Muslim and Arab students were really under the radar, and things that would happen to our students, administration and higher ups, would be more reactionary than proactive. So I thought, what better way, to start a consulting company than to focus on that. And as they say, need is the mother of invention. So the rest is history. And Abeer actually means a couple of things. That's the beauty of the Arabic language. Abeer, like if you want to take it for face value, just means a bird or, any type of bird, but also means to take flight. And so I decided to name my company Abeer because I hope to take flight with my advocacy work and really uplift all voices of students of color with a focus on Arab and Muslim youth. Please throw your comments in the chat. If I'm speaking too fast, let me know. I look forward to having more conversations with you as we go. What I promise, I always like to say what I promise as opposed to say you will definitely learn all of this. There are 4 things that we will talk about today, and I like to divide things into topics. Hey, it's almost like a timeline, right? Social studies. Number 1, affinity groups. What do you need to know about affinity groups? What are they? You may be here and you know something. You may be here and know nothing. Today, you're going to get really kind of an overview what an affinity group is, why they are important, and how you can go about trying to create one if you're interested. It's so important for number 2, Arab versus Muslim. What is the difference? There is a difference, right? And people tend to conflate the 2, but we'll talk a little bit about that, which led to the creation of affinity groups that I created here in the county. Impact. How did the affinity group that I created help the Arab and female students that I worked with? And you're going to learn a little bit about the diversity within those groups. Pushback, how to address pushback from staff and the community. For some reason, affinity groups or groups that are focused on students of color tend to get pushback and people get worried and scared. But I'll give you a few tips on how you can address the pushback from your community and your staff or anybody else that's giving you pushback so you can be very successful and how you want to continue with the affinity group as well. What I do not promise, because I can promise something, but I also want to make sure that you're not going to think you're going to know everything. Number one, you're going to be a master. You'll master the content. That's not the goal. The goal is we will start here, but you won't stay there, right? So I want you to take this information, build on it, and hopefully give you a couple of nuggets that you'll be able to want to take and learn more. Also, it's not comprehensive. You're not going to know everything about Arab and Muslims at all. Their history in this country spans since the inception of this country, unfortunately, all the way into, modern day and even before that. So we're not going to learn everything, but we're going to learn the basics to give you an idea of what the difference is and how they may be similar. So I like to start off with this quote whenever I work in what I do. So I'm going to give you a couple of seconds just to read it, also so I can get a swig of water. And, rest in power, bell hooks. So bell hooks says, any radical pedagogy must insist that everyone's presence is acknowledged. That insistence cannot be simply stated. It has to be demonstrated through pedagogical practices. To begin, the professor must genuinely value everyone's presence. And this is very, I love the wording, it's very precise. And it really speaks to what an affinity group is about. But also when we talk about pedagogy, we tend to think about pedagogy as just the content that you're teaching or the assessment that you're giving. Pedagogy is a practice. How are you taking everything that you do for students as a practice? And how are you making sure that you're valuing everybody's presence? And therefore why affinity groups are important and why they were created is out of the fact that it's lacking in the pedagogy and in our school climates as well. So I think this is a really great way to shape why we're having this conversation and its importance. So if we take a look at these pictures, the first thing that came to mind when I was like, well, if we talk about affinity groups, how can we give it to the least common denominator? So I thought about historically what I would consider, as I'm putting air quotes, affinity groups. Country clubs, they were exclusionary, weren't they? They were for either wealthy people, they were either for people of a certain ethnicity or race. They were exclusionary, but they were people who came together. Fraternities and sororities, same thing. People on campus who came together and said, we are pretty much the same. And it's kind of what people consider now. The people who give pushback to affinity groups are exclusionary. But we have a history of this in our country about excluding people, but creating spaces for people who are like-minded. And unfortunately, because these were exclusionary, some people were not able to reap the benefits. But then you have the reaction to that, which were HBCUs. And you think about HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, it was a response to the fact that they were being excluded. And then you create these amazing HBCUs, Lincoln in Pennsylvania is one of the oldest. Here in Maryland, we have a few which are great, Morgan State, Coppin State, all of those. But those were a reaction to the fact that, we're going to create our own spaces as well. And we're going to make sure that we have a place for where people who are like-minded can come together and learn. So when we think about affinity groups and we get the pushback, one thing we should always tell people is there's been a history of exclusion since the beginning of, like I said, the inception of this country. So why is it the fact when people of color want to create their own spaces, it becomes an issue? And so these are just some examples that I think of when I think of affinity groups. But really what we're going to talk about now in this first part are affinity groups. So I have two questions. If you want to just throw them in the chat, that would be fine. That if you are able to answer these kind of jog your mind. How can affinity groups provide a space for marginalized students to be seen and heard? And what conditions and resources are needed to run an effective affinity group? So think about those two questions. Again, if you don't know anything about affinity groups, that's fine. If you know something or there's a reason why you're here, why don't you throw some answers to those questions in the chat? I can't see the chat, so. All right, so these are two questions that we're actually going to answer for this part of the affinity group. We have being with people, have familiar experiences, create space for people to be brave and speak up. Yep. Affinity groups give students of color a safe space that they can feel comfortable. Yes, providing a space of comfort and people. Exactly. Very, very well said. And the words comfort and, similar experiences and brave spaces is exactly what it is. And the conditions and the resources can really vary based on the type of group or what group you're thinking of joining, and especially the age group as well. So let's give a little bit of a background of what is an affinity group. Now, depending on who you ask, people are going to give you different answers, but an affinity group in general is a group of people with common interests, background, and experience that come together to support each other. And that's why affinity groups are important depending on these three common characteristics: common interests, background, and experience. They're there to support each other. Now, affinity groups for people of color can be magical places in historical elite and exclusive systems. And I love the word magical places because if you've ever been part of an affinity group, it is magical. You get the sense of unity and you get the sense of camaraderie among everybody. Participants for both adult and student affinity groups often find it to be a place of encouragement and a way to increase their sense of belonging in their institution. Many people think that affinity groups are going to be exclusionary, but it's quite the opposite. When you create an affinity group, it helps people feel more belonged in their institution and more inclined to want to be part of that institution as opposed to be on the fringes or marginalized as well. And I do say adult and student affinity groups because there are adult affinity groups, whether you're in the workforce, whether you work in a school, those can definitely be created. When I worked for Baltimore County Public Schools, my colleague and I created an affinity group for teachers of color within the school system, and it was powerful. We talked about things like we said, we had common interests, common backgrounds and experiences, but it was also a space for us to sit here and say, okay, what are some of the issues that we're facing as teachers of color, and how can we address that to change the system? So when people want to talk about affinity groups and think they're actually in the deficit mindset, affinity groups are actually in the positive mindset because you're coming together not only to form support, but also to increase your sense of belonging and how you can make your institution or your school a better place. So why an affinity group? What are the reasons why? Well, of course, for people of color, we've been ignored for centuries, and they do, even when they attract a large amount of people. You have businesses or you have schools who really want to bring in people of color, but then they don't provide the support, and people feel isolated. So they also are marginalized from other community events and programming. If you're a teacher, you can sometimes feel that sense of being marginalized, especially if you don't follow the same customs or traditions as well. And then community leaders find reasons to question the legitimacy of people of color groups and may interrogate organizers about what exactly we're doing when we get together. And that's, again, going back to my image of the country clubs or the fraternities or sororities. People don't question those. They're like, it's a norm. But when people of color want to come together, all of a sudden they get asked and they get questioned about it. But if you think about the past slide of why they're important, the best answer is because we want to increase belonging. And we're actually trying to help you do a better job at what you're supposed to be doing in the first place. But these are also the other reasons why affinity groups are important. People of color need their own spaces. The way you talk, the way you act, the way you react to each other is very different than you are with people who are not from your own background. Gather to be free from mainstream stereotypes and marginalizations. I am a female Muslim Palestinian hijabi. I know everything about mainstream and stereotypes and marginalization. It gets tiring. And I'm not always up for wanting to explain myself or tell people who I am and what I do. So creating an affinity space for that is very refreshing because then you can just let your guard down and not have to worry about those particular issues. Space for you to be your authentic self without judgment, scrutiny, insecurity, or muffle your self-expression. Again, I'll use myself as an example. As a hijabi, I don't need to feel like I have to be somebody else to make somebody else feel comfortable. In an affinity group, that's what students do. That's what adults do when they come together. They know that people already understand them, and therefore they don't need to be somebody else, and they can be their authentic self. Fine, excuse me, to support each other, as we said in the meeting, but it's also for people to come together who have common backgrounds, but sit there and have sometimes just a thought partner or somebody that they can just talk to and say, you know, I experienced this today. This is really weighing heavy on me. Have you experienced it? And a lot of times people of color experience the same issues, just in different spaces, and they're there to support each other. And finally, redefine ourselves. Communities of color have always been defined by the larger community around them, who they are, what they do, how they act, whether it's a stereotype or not. But when you create your affinity group, you're actually reclaiming your identity. You actually are reclaiming who you are and how you want to be perceived without any of the other notions of how the outside world is going to perceive you. And that's very important, because when we talk a little bit more about the affinity groups that I created, students do come feeling like they want to redefine themselves because of going back to the second bullet of the ideas that put them in the stereotypes or help them feel marginalized. So creating an affinity group. Now, I want to be clear that these are just some of the basic ideas. There's a long list that continues with creating an affinity group. I just wanted to touch upon some of the most basic ideas, but also some of the more important pieces when you're thinking about creating an affinity group. The very first one are the key issues. Now, I'm going to use it as a school concept. If you're thinking about a community or if you're thinking about a business, these are similar, but as an educator, I'm going to use just a school as an example moving forward. The key issues: identify how the school is perceived by those attending or who want to attend the affinity group, or an issue facing a group of students that need to be discussed. So the example that I give, when I started my affinity group in one of the schools, the main issue that that kept coming up and why I created the affinity group is because a student who was wearing hijab, which is the female Muslim head covering like I have on right now, was being harassed about her hijab. So the key issue that the school wanted to tackle was, how can we bring the students, the Muslim female students, together to feel safe, but also what is it that the school can do, learning from the student being comfortable speaking within the affinity group and giving feedback so the school can also tackle the issue. That's just a small topic. There are many, many topics and key issues that you may use in order for you to create an affinity group. Second one, and these aren't any particular order, but these are, like I said, the most important pieces that you want to keep in mind when you're creating an affinity group. Get admin on board, especially if you're in a school. Administrators, of course, we all know, don't like it when you do things and they're not aware, because at the end of the day, whatever comes back from the community is going to come back to them. So make sure you get support from the admin, because they'll help you in many ways. Number one, they'll let you know which teachers are also great allies or co-conspirators, as Dr. Bettina Love says. They'll help you connect with students. Which students do they think would benefit the most from the affinity groups? And also they'll help you navigate the school, look at the schedule, look at the timings, and all of those things that you need within a school system. Also, they would be able to help you to dispel the criticism and connect the group to the mission of the school climate. If admin are on board, of course, we all know how school systems work. You're not going to have all teachers or staff members or even board members who may agree. But when you have the support of the admin, then you feel more comfortable thinking, okay, I have the support of the admin. I'm not going to worry about everybody else because I have this issue that I need to take care of. So making sure that you have the admin and the proper staff to help you is very important. Gather the group of students. When you finally have your group of students that want to be part of the affinity group. Now, affinity groups are voluntary. They should not be mandatory. Affinity groups should be a place where kids feel comfortable and want to be a part of. It should not be something that is forced. When you have your students get together, what I always do is I ask the students what they want. Of course, we explain what an affinity group is, what my role is going to be as a facilitator, but also what are some of the ideas that are weighing heavy on them. Are there some activities that they would like to do? Or are there just some topics that they want to tackle and how they want to go about with the affinity group? Some kids really like using affinity groups as just a place for them to come together and talk. But then some kids like to use affinity groups as a way to educate their peers in their school, but also a way to do activities together with people who share common backgrounds. And finally, follow student leads. Let the students decide how they want the group to function. At the end of the day, you're there for the students. Yeah, teachers tend to like to be in control and want to let students know what they think, but also let the students lead. This is also an opportunity for students in an affinity group to shine. I've had students who have been very timid within a classroom or don't really shine, but then when they're within the affinity group, they really have a moment for them to take on leadership roles, to work in a sense of community, and also develop their own skill sets that they want. So follow the lead of the students and see how they want to go. You may also plan an activity for one day for the affinity group to meet. Then when you get there and all of a sudden something happened at school and all they want to talk about is what was going on at school or what's going on at home. That's okay. That's what this affinity group is for, is to follow the student leads and why you are there. So before we get to Arab versus Muslim, I just want to open up for see if anybody has any questions or comments before we get into the deeper concept of Arab and Muslim and what's the difference and why it's important to know. Questions, comments?
We had a comment in the chat that the resources that will be needed is an educator who understands them and their background,
Yes.
and work of diverse authors.
I love that. That's so powerful because, and we're going to talk about why it's important to know your students and the danger when you don't know your students. I guess, you know, the famous danger of a single story, but yeah, the resources. And again, if you don't know, ask. You know, Muna's in this group as well, and we're part of a larger group called the Arab American Educators Network. Reach out. Find out, and when you show that you want to learn more, students really take it to heart and realize that you really are passionate about who they are and what they do. So
another comment, the groups can be a good resource for social studies and ELA teachers when your reading is related to their culture.
Yes, I love that. And, you know, I'm a social studies nerd, and it's so important because so I'm going to give a really quick story as to why that comment really resonated with me. When I taught social studies, we all know a lot of social studies content can be very whitewashed, and it really excludes a lot of stories. So when we were talking about the Transcontinental Railroad of the 1800s, I brought in the voice of Chinese immigrants who came and really built the Transcontinental Railroad, but how they were excluded from the fanfare and the celebrations. And if you see any of the pictures, those who were in the pictures, the Chinese Americans had to turn their face so they wouldn't be in the image. So I had a student who was Filipino. He was not even Chinese American. And when he found out about that little piece of history, he was in tears because he's like, I've never seen myself in any curriculum that we do. I've never seen myself in any way. And unfortunately, since that was almost what we call a deficit mindset, but it still gravitated towards him because he felt seen. And it's very important that, yes, the resources that you use for affinity groups can be one of those foundations that sets for ELA, social studies, or some other content as well. I'm doing some work with music offices as well who want to learn more about this topic that we're talking about now, Arab versus Muslim, and how that impacts what you teach and how you teach and how students are going to react as well. So this is the next question. Now, some people in this chat already know this answer, but the question is, what is the difference between Arab versus Muslim and why is it important to know? So I want to see if I could ask the audience if they know the difference and the importance as well. Nationality versus religion. Okay. Anybody else? Why is it important to know? Arab is a racial ethnic group. Muslim is a religious affiliation. Good. Yay. I think we've got like the advanced academics people in this class today. Very, very good. Yeah, so there's a major difference, but it's also important to know. And this is what we're going to talk about in this section. First of all, now, this is a recent statistic. I think it went up to like 2 billion plus. There are 1.8 billion Muslims in the world and growing. So when you think about that number, think about how difficult it is to put such a large number of people, excuse me, under one type of category or one type of misconception. Now, if it was 1.8 billion people, like of one country of the same background, that might be a little different. But you have 1.8 billion Muslims and growing from all over the world. And this map is a very good example as to why the diversity of Islam is such an important concept to understand. First of all, the largest misconception is all Arabs are Muslim or all Muslims are Arabs. That's a myth. Arabs are only 15% of the Muslim population. 15% of 1.8 billion people. Now, the reason why people think that all Arabs are Muslims is because, number one, the religion of Islam is in Arabic. The Quran is in Arabic. You pray in Arabic. It came down in what is present-day Saudi Arabia on the Arabian Peninsula to a prophet who was of the Arab culture. Therefore, people automatically connect the two, thinking that Arab equals Muslim or vice versa. The reason why this is also very damaging is the fact that when we think about Jesus or all the other prophets, they're in other parts of the Middle East, what is modern day, what we know, of course, as Palestine, but also what I call the OGs of Christianity are also from Arab and African countries. Ethiopia has one of the oldest Christian groups as well. Egypt, the Coptic Christians are one of the oldest Christian groups as well. So it's very dangerous to sit there and conflate thinking that you're all Arabs are Muslim, because then you're negating Arab Christians, but also Arabs who are of Jewish descent as well. A really good book to want to read or listen to is When We Were Arab by Masoud, who talks about his ancestry as being a North African Jew, but the connection between Arab culture and religion. So it's important to understand that when you meet an Arab, they may be Muslim, they may be not. Number two, the largest Muslim majority countries, Indonesia has the largest population of Muslims in the world, over 100 million Muslims on that island. So they're not Arab, they're not African, they're Asian. So that's very important to understand that when you talk about Muslims, you're talking about people from various cultures, but also the majority Muslim countries are Indonesia, Malaysia, excuse me, India and Pakistan. So you have South Asia, right? Or Southeast Asia, and then you have the other Asian countries. So when those countries are the ones that are Muslim majority, then you're talking about a totally different culture and group of people that come together when you're talking about Islam. Finally, Islam is the official religion in 26 countries over the 3 continents. Africa, surprisingly, Nigeria has one of the largest African populations as well. And then, like I said, when I gave homage to the enslaved Africans who came, majority of them were Muslim. When we talk about the enslaved Muslims who came from West Africa, majority of them were Muslim. And for various reasons as to why they were enslaved, which goes against that stereotype as to, oh, by the way, they were just enslaved and they didn't have any culture or they were illiterate. It was actually quite the opposite. So this is one of the reasons why it's important to understand the difference between Muslim and Arab. Only 50%, and not all Muslims are Arabs, and not all Arabs are Muslim. Another important thing to understand is what makes a country Arab. Who are the Arab people? Who are they not? One common thing is the language. Years and years ago, centuries ago, learning Arabic was considered to be an honor. So if you came from a non-Arabic speaking country and you spoke Arabic, you would be considered an Arab. This was also prevalent in this part when you talk about Islamic Spain, where Arabic was spoken among other languages. But in order for you to be part of that community, speaking Arabic was very important. A shared history and cultural tradition. Now, all the countries here that are white, from North Africa to what is now the current Middle East, including Somalia, they all share some sort of history and cultural tradition. The history, of course, is the fact that when Islam spread and the Arabs spread, they brought their cultures with them. But if you know about how different the cultures are in North Africa, for example, because you have the Amazigh cultures that are what we used to call the Berber, which is a derogatory term, but the Amazigh, when the Arabs went in and entered those countries, they infused some of those culture traditions as well. And the membership in the League of Arab States, which is still functioning, but also if you were a member, then you were considered part of the Arab countries. Now, I have this circled because it's very important to know that these countries, Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Turkey, Kazakhstan, all of those countries, Azerbaijan, are not Arab countries. And it's very important to understand that because the fact that it goes to the concept of the diversity of Islam, but also you're negating the fact that they come from another culture. People from Iran are Persian. They are not Arab. They don't speak Arabic. They don't follow, some of their traditions may be similar, but they are not Arab. And also it really dispels some of the myths and the fact that, for example, Afghanistan is always at the center when we're talking about Arabs in the Middle East, but they are not. It's totally different. I think I saw a question about Berbers, if they are Muslim. So the Berbers from the area of North Africa who are Amazigh or those groups, yes, they are. Are they? No, they are not. Historically, the Berbers, which they preferred to be called Amazigh now, as opposed to Berber because of the derogatory term, they are Muslim. Majority of them are Muslim, but they are not Arab. They do speak Arabic because of the Arabic influence, but they also have their own dialects and languages. And if you listen to the dialects in North Africa, they have a fusion of the Amazigh and their traditional languages with French and with Arabic as well. So they are not ethnically Arab. They are their own group of people in North Africa. But when the Arab and Islam spread, they took in some of those traditions as well. So it's very important when you're thinking about your students to keep these in mind as well. Oh yeah, it's very fascinating. A lot of people don't know this because we've been so used to clumping everybody into one category. But again, the diversity, not only in Islam, but also the diversity of your Arab students. You may have a kid from, say, Iraq, who's very different than a kid who's from, say, Syria or Egypt. There are a lot of other factors that come with it that we'll talk about when I talk about why I started my affinity group as well. So again, this is a very basic idea as to who are Muslims and who are Arab and why it's important to know the difference. Now, some more statistics that people need to keep in mind, especially in schools, because of the diversity. According to Pew Research and ISPU, which is the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, Muslims are America's most ethnically diverse faith community. And that's something we take pride in. I attend a mosque here in Baltimore County, which is one of the largest in the state. And you can go on any given day in Jum'ah or on holiday, you will see people representing countries from all over the world. And that's what makes Muslims so unique, is they are the most ethnically diverse community in the world. They are not all just Arab, or they are not all just Indian or Pakistani. So they come from all over the world. So the question becomes, if they're so ethnically diverse, why are we trying to put them in the box? And how is this piece of information so important when you want to bring your students together for an affinity group to understand that they're going to be coming with all of these intersectionalities and layers that they bring with them? Now, let me just go back. The largest right now Muslim communities, of course, are the Black American communities as well. And there's a distinction between African Muslims and then Black Americans, because again, Black Americans have brought in so much of their own history within this country. And then Black Africans have come with the migration from their countries into the present United States. But there's also that distinction. But the largest and the most historically significant ones are those of the Black American Muslim communities. One thing to understand as well is why it's also difficult to see, if you think about creating an affinity group for your students, how are you going to know who your Muslim students are? They don't all walk around looking like me, or they don't all walk around looking like the typical, what we think Muslim men should look like, dark hair, a beard, dark complexion. You're not. And the problem for this, and why there isn't much research on Muslim Americans, especially youth, unfortunately, for two things. Number one, ethnic identity markers. Skin color is a huge significant component in this country. We base everything on race. And again, like somebody in the chat said, Arabs is not a race, it's really an ethnicity. Because if you go to Sudan, who are Arab, but they are also Africans. If you go to Somalia, if you go there, if you go to other parts of the country that are of the Arab country, they could have all of those identities as well. And then when we moved away from the skin color component and we do immigrant communities, that's also basically on color. Latinos, for example, are all that one ethnicity, one group, or one race. Like I said, Africans who come from African countries and come as immigrant communities. But again, we're just focusing on one piece, which can also be detrimental because then you're overseeing a larger population within your school system. And like I said, Dr. Sosan Jabir said it best in her research. Muslim students tend to be either hyper-focused when it's negative, think 9/11 or anything that happens on the news, or not even focused on, where we don't, or misrepresented because we don't see them based on these factors, which is a very important piece to consider as you're thinking about the data for your students. Again, according to ISBU, the reason why that's dangerous and we don't do enough research is because Muslim American identity is very complex. It encompasses and intersects religion, gender, skin color, national, linguistic dimensions. We were just talking about the Amazigh, Algerian, maybe, Tunisian, Moroccan. Those are their identity markers as well. Linguistically, they could be Muslim, they could be female, they could be not, they could be very light skinned given to the French influence or other ideas as well. And part two is, although Muslim Americans share common faith, we are very extremely diverse. I'll use myself, personal, local, and immediate. As an Arab American Muslim, my cultural association is very different than my friend who is Pakistani, born and raised in England. So think of all of those intersectionalities you have when you're thinking about your Muslim students. We don't have one particular area or dimension we can put them in, which is why people are kind of baffled as to why they're not showing up, because you don't have those processes in schools in order for you to get down to the deeper level as to how are you going to find your Muslim students and what are you going to add to that to honor their intersectionality. And again, what ends up happening is Muslim American youth exhibit and negotiate their identity in many ways. Kids are kids, humans are humans. And what ends up happening is we have self-awareness issues. You have students who are very confident in who they are as Arab or Muslim students. But then again, we have a lot of students who are not. Based on a lot of the data that we've seen, they're mainly marginalized. They live at the fringes of the school community. One example I always give is a girl who does wear hijab and wants to go and can't attend some of the parties or some of the functions for school because they kind of go against religious identity. Same with a Muslim male. So they end up living on the fringes of the school community because they're trying to grapple between their own identity in religion, but also the identity with the larger community around them. They're afraid to self-identify as Muslim. This is extremely important also for girls who end up starting wearing the hijab. They have a conflict. Well, if I wear hijab, I am following what I need to follow for my religion, but at the same token, I don't want to wear it because I don't want to be excluded. I don't want to be harassed. And then the statistic is 50% worry over being bullied in the future. And that's a large statistic because when things come up, when we have the anniversary of 9/11 or something happens on the news, or when we talk about curriculum, these things come up to the surface. And how are we dealing with them in order for students not having these self-awareness issues? So some of the reasons why Muslim students and Arab students end up having these self-awareness issues is for these, again, this is from ISPU, the Institute for Public Understanding, and ISPU, Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, sorry, is these are some of the headlines of, yes, Gail, I'll answer that question in a second. It's a very good question, of why we have these self-identity issues. So this is a span over 25 years of coverage pertaining to over 2 million articles that included headlines, stereotypes, and negativity. I'm not going to read them all out loud, but I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to just preview some of the findings that they came up with from the 25 years of coverage. And then we'll talk really briefly as to how this leads to self-awareness issues. So these are just in headlines. So I'm a child of the 80s. If you're a child of the 80s, woo, we grew up in the best decade, right? From the moment I was aware of my surroundings, and I'm going to go with the stereotypes. I don't think I've ever heard anything positive that has with whether it's the news, whether it was movies, or even songs. Like I remember when The Clash came out with Rock the Casbah, I'm like, wow, this song is so fascinating. What are they, how is that identity about Arabs and Muslims in that video really impacting me? But these are things just in the media that are impacting students that lead them to those self-awareness issues that are really damaging because they internalize them. Imam Omar Suleiman from the Yaqeen Institute did a study that says there are different types of these stereotypes that students react to. And one of them is internalizing your own sense of self and internalizing stereotypes. And how does that impact students as well? But this is in the media. We're not even talking about curriculum. We're not even talking about what's being taught in the classroom, how it's being utilized, and who's writing the curriculum, and what are the conscious and unconscious biases that are happening. And to answer your question, Gail, yes, if you don't wear the hijab, thank you, Dr. Alexander, for using the term hijab. Hijab means covering in Arabic. But again, the diversity and the complexity of Muslim identity is not all girls wear it. Some people believe strongly into wearing their hijab as a sense of identity and following the tenets of Islam, and some do not. But that does not make you a better or worse Muslim if you do or you don't wear it. Same with Muslim men. They are prescribed and encouraged to grow a beard, but some of them don't. Some of them can't for work reasons. Some of them just can't grow a beard. And those are just small examples as to how and why Islamic identity is more personal than it is as saying everybody who wears hijab is considered a good Muslim or not. Of course, you're welcome. So these are just some of the ideas as to why they internalize them. I want to also focus on girls and females. I think it's very important because when we talk about Islam and Arabs, these are the most common stereotypes that girls have to face. They are oppressed. They are passive. They have no or few rights. They're veiled. Oh, I hate that word veiled, but they have to cover. They're uneducated. So these are also common stereotypes that our students have to come in and fight day in and day out. And going back to why affinity groups are important, they want to be in a space where they don't have to constantly explain themselves or prove themselves with anything based on these misconceptions. And one of the main reasons why I started my advocacy group just for female students is for them to be aware of how they can advocate for themselves, but also how they can come together and work with each other to build each other up to go against these common stereotypes. So these are all things that some students internalize, some students don't, and they have the ability to react to it, but some students are not able to react to it as well. And here's another picture from Hanan's Corner. I have her tagged in here. She's beautiful artist, but I love this picture because it goes to this actual comment. The intersection of gender and numerous factors within their developmental context results in a unique issues experienced by young American Muslim women. Some of these issues include a culturally determined narrative of women in Islam and religious spaces. So they're straddling between their world of being either Pakistani, Malay, Arab, or whatever, and those cultural narratives of what people think women should be in Islam and religious spaces. Issues related to the observance of hijab, just like the question was, does it make you less of a Muslim if you do wear hijab or you don't? I know people who wore hijab who took it off. Doesn't make them less of a Muslim either. It's all by choice. And the internalized and repercussions of beauty standards on body image among young American Muslim women. We know that body image is very detrimental to girls who are not of Muslim faith and American girls in general. Add into the layers of these intersectionalities, and you have Muslim girls who are fighting so many different concepts and living and straddling more than one world. So this is a way for people to understand why it's important to create these spaces for American Muslim girls and women, but also why it's important to understand what they're facing. And when you see two Muslim girls, one who probably is wearing hijab and one who isn't, what's going on and why they decided to live their lives openly the way they do. So I thought this really captured the essence of the developmental context of Muslim females and Arab females as well, who may not be Muslim, but are Christian. And there are some cultural concepts as well that they follow. So the layers of the identification for Muslim girls is, also another layer of that intersectionality. I love this comment from a report I just did for Religion Matters and from Dr. Imam Umar Suleiman, who did a study about female identity. And Lena was one of the participants whose age of 17 from the study explained, every time I put on my hijab, I feel like I have to wear it in a way that tells Americans I'm not some oppressed Saudi girl. Oppressed, and then Saudi automatically, like we said, they go to the Arab context. Tells the aunties or the older women in the masjid that I'm still a good Muslim, while telling other Muslim girls that I'm still prettier and cooler than the rest of you. So those three comments talk about the various intersectionalities that Muslim girls are facing. One, the outside world of people thinking they're oppressed and they're Arab already. Number two, within their own cultural and religious context. And number three, within their own circles. Girls are girls and they're competing with each other. So this is a very good way as to how affinity groups bring girls together and help them really dissect these issues and these identity factors that they're facing. So when you think about this comment, think about all of these intersectionalities that come with it when you interact with a Muslim or Arab female, but also especially all the intersectionalities that come with it if they are hijabi, if they are a girl of color, and if they're also a refugee, an immigrant, all of those layers that come with it. So we needed all of those concepts to understand the impact and why I started these affinity groups as well. I'm going to pause here before we continue, just to see if anybody has any questions or comments before we continue. I know it's a lot to take in, but, context is very important. And having these pieces of information are very important as you move forward thinking about your next school year and who your students are. We'll do the teacher pause.
We have a comment, such profound information you are sharing with us.
Thank you. I hope it's beneficial. Thank you. So for the impact, I'm just checking my clock, make sure we're good with time. What were the reasons I started the affinity groups and how did the affinity group help the students grow? So as you saw from the data that I shared with you, a lot of the intersectionalities and the layers, there were many reasons why I started with this affinity group. So again, according to the ISPU, we talked about the complexity and we talked about sharing common faith, but at the same time, they're very diverse with respect to cultural association. The problem that I was facing when I started the affinity group, if I had not known that this school reached out to me because a student was having issue with hijab, the problem that we faced as a school when we were gathering students who wanted to be part of the affinity group, or if we want to ask them if they wanted to, is school data does not reflect Muslim student identity, especially the intersectionality. And let me put it in perspective. One of the affinity groups that I started because the girl was, female. She identified as female. She wore hijab. She is Muslim. She is a Black Muslim student, right? And she's American. She's not, she didn't come here as a new student. She's been here forever. Her parents, her family's been here forever. So there are 5 factors. So where are we going to end up using that data to help that student thrive as well? Also, when we don't have that data, common misconceptions of all Muslim youth are the same, just like the question about hijab as well. Lead to misidentification, misinformation, and lack of a deeper dive. And unfortunately, I laugh when I think about this, but when I was starting one of the affinity groups in the high schools, because people didn't understand the concept of hijab or Islam, one teacher reached out to me and asked if a boy could join the group because he covered his head. I reached back and I said, sorry, but Muslim boys don't cover their head. The boy that you're identifying is a student who identifies with the Sikh religion, wearing a turban. And again, these are very important concepts because people don't understand how to differentiate other groups of people who are misidentified as Muslim, but also what to look for. Another issue that I was coming up with and why I wanted to start this is a lot of teachers end up going just to the language learner population, thinking all Muslim students or all Arab students are just in that population, and they're not able to really know who their Muslim or Arab students are because they didn't take the time to understand them, but it's also not in the data. So again, the youth and negotiate their identity in many, many ways. So that's a reason why I started the affinity group, but also it was a very good learning experience for the school because they're like, wow, we never thought of it that way, or we didn't know that this was part of what we were looking for. So a little bit of a background to that. I started 2 groups in the local county that I'm in. So they're in 2 middle schools. I was very strategic and wanted middle school. I'm a middle school teacher, but also that's where some majority of the issues were happening, were in the middle schools, but they were very different student bodies. One middle school that I was in had students who were, none of them were from what we call L learners. They were all in mainstream, but they also were of various different backgrounds as well. In the one school that we were there, like I said, Black Muslim American, you had Palestinians, you had Pakistanis, you had people from Azerbaijan as well, Uzbekistan, I'm sorry, from Uzbekistan as well. So it was very diverse in that student body. But the reason why that started in that school is because of the student who was being harassed for her hijab. The second school that I was a part of, all of the students that are part of that group are from language learners, mainly because that school is a language learner hub, and majority of the students who are from other cultures end up going there. But also the teachers, that's who they were familiar with. So the one school where the students spoke English well, they knew how to communicate, they were familiar with the system. I had another school where I worked with students who just came from other countries, had brought trauma from being from a war-torn country, didn't know the language, were trying to navigate the world around them. And that's another reason why I started these affinity groups, is because these girls were falling kind of under the cracks in the stress of them trying to navigate the world around them, especially if they weren't familiar with a lot of the issues that they were happening. Relates to the different needs of the school and the community. The school that had the large L population, the community themselves were struggling with how to identify and how to relate to those students. Parents were also struggling. So it becomes a self-advocacy group, not only for students, but also for parents, in order for you to be that bridge with the school as well. Doing these affinity groups, especially if you go to this level, is not easy work, but it's also very rewarding because you come in and you're able to help students and parents navigate the world as well. Finally, the diversity of the groups, like I said, the one school where they were all very well adjusted to the schools were very diverse. Same with the one in the other school. I had a girl from Djibouti who spoke French. I have a girl from Afghanistan who spoke Farsi. I have girls who were from Egypt who spoke Arabic. The beauty about that was their all identifying factor was they were all Muslim. Some of them identified as Arab so they can connect that way. But they also made a concerted effort, especially the ones who were from L learners or language learners, to encourage each other to speak and understand each other. There was no sense of division or no sense of making fun of each other, even in middle school. They knew they were there for a common goal and a common reason, which really made the affinity group much stronger for them. The main reasons why I also started an affinity group, and your reasons could be totally different. Your reasons can be very basic. But me coming from my lived experience, born and raised in the United States, I knew what it was like to be a female hijabi in a setting, but I also understood watching my own relatives navigate the world when English wasn't their first language, or coming from a different culture, trying to understand the world around them. The first one was advocacy. I really wanted people to see that my Muslim and Arab female students weren't just this little box that people thought they were. They were fun, they were vibrant, they were spunky. They really knew what they wanted in life. They just didn't know how to go about doing it sometimes. So I wanted also students to see another person who looked like them, leading them in these particular spaces. Intersectionalities. These affinity groups really opened the eyes for the school staff and community to see, wow, we really can't put Fatima in a box because she has all these intersectionalities that come with it. And how can we learn more about these intersectionalities and why they're important for these intersectionalities to happen? Dispel stereotypes. Same thing as going back to what we were talking earlier about what people's perceptions are of Muslim and Arab females. These affinity groups really also help dispel these stereotypes with the staff, with the administration, and also with the student body. They knew that coming together, they would learn a little bit more, especially if the girls in the affinity group wanted to create some sort of school-wide activity in order for their students and their peers to understand who they are. Finally, a sense of sisterhood. Both affinity groups really developed that sense of sisterhood within each other. And like I said, with the students who were just language learners and wanted to develop their English, they learned how to deal with each other. They learned how to communicate with each other, but they also look forward to spending time together outside of their daily Monday through Friday, 8 to 3 classrooms with other students who didn't reflect them. And they were happy to carve out a little piece of time for them to come together and just talk about things that they all were able to relate to. So that was my why. But again, your why could be totally different as to identifying why you want an affinity group and why it's important to your students as well. So what I always do when I have created a affinity group is I do a pre-survey and a post-survey. A pre-survey asking, why are you joining? What do you look forward to doing? What are some of the activities? And then what I do is I do a post survey to see if they have accomplished what they were discussing in their pre-survey, and if I have accomplished what I wanted to accomplish with the affinity group. One of the quotes, which I really love, is the student said, definitely. She loved what being part of the group and why she was a part of it, because I learned more about my identity and how to be proud of who I am, even if we are a minority. And that really hits the nail on the head because, again, it speaks volumes to the fact that students need people to help them navigate their world. They want people to help them self-identify. They want them to know how they can sit there and advocate for themselves. But also you have students who are very shy. And just because they're shy and they're not participating doesn't mean that they don't want to make people aware of who they are and what their identity is. So one of the main reasons is because I want students to leave feeling that they are proud of who they are, but also they're part of the larger community and how they can contribute to that community as well. So before I continue, I'm not sure if there are any questions in the chat. I think some popped up, but I weren't able to see them. Before we get to pushback, are there any questions that I can answer?
We do have one. He says, this may be a stupid question, but are all Muslims required to speak Hebrew because the Quran, they need to speak another language? Question mark.
Okay, so no stupid questions. The language that is spoken and read in the Quran and in prayers is actually Arabic, not Hebrew. Hebrew is in Judaism, very close. We are cousins, but they are when students, if there is a family who is practicing Muslim, yes, Arabic is a language that is being taught because in order to read the Quran, it has to be read in Arabic. Now, when people come to Islam, there are people who what we call reverts who want to become Muslim. They learn to read Arabic so they can say their prayers, but also they are allowed to read in English until they are able to recite their prayers in Arabic. So the language is Arabic that is required in order for the prayers to be said and also for the Quran to be read. So it is in Arabic. It's similar to Hebrew. I took Hebrew for a semester in college. I thought it would be very similar. No, I failed miserably, but very good question. But thank you for asking.
And so, thank you.
You're welcome. So the last part of our session today, and Dr. Alexander, I hope I'm good on time. I'm sorry, I'm like all over the place. I want to make sure we're good.
You are good. Yeah, 15 minutes.
Wonderful. So we talked a little bit about what affinity groups are, the data that you can go back and digest with your schools or communities about Arab and Muslim students and their self-identification, why I started an affinity group and how it was powerful. I think one of the major issues that is a drawback for people is pushback. As educators, unfortunately, we are getting pushback from everything, from book bans to self-identification to curriculum to all of it. So what I would like to end off with is how you can address the pushback from staff, the community, or even your own colleagues as to why you would want to have an affinity group. Some of the common comments for pushback is you're causing segregation, you're dividing the students, you're doing this because it's always about race, or you're separating the students into groups and we don't want that to happen, or you have very staunch board and parent disapproval. Why are you doing this? You're causing all of this division among all of our students. What I always like to say is good pushback to respond to this pushback. And sometimes pushback is good because it really makes you dig deeper and see how strong you are about your convictions and how powerful you're connected to the change that you want to make. My favorite quote by Jay-Z is, "Numbers don't lie, check the scoreboard." And how can you counter that is because you need to check the scoreboard. The proof is in the pudding, y'all. It's in the data. First of all, the one thing we do want to do is when people give pushback, let's validate their feelings. Okay, I understand you're upset. I understand you're scared. I understand you're confused, but that doesn't mean that we can't continue what we're doing and can't have the dialogue. Scoreboard, use the data. People are doing affinity groups because the data does not reflect that students are feeling welcome and feel connected to their schools. And the more that we use that data, the more we see that kids who are being identified in school, who are validated, do much better in the schools as well. Have those courageous conversations. These are not easy. That's why they're called courageous conversations. And there are many, many ways that you can lead these courageous conversations with your colleagues and with other people. Discuss this at the board and the PTA meetings. I've noticed the loudest voices tend to get the most attention, but it shouldn't detract you. Continue. This isn't an easy battle sometimes, but for us to identify for all of our students, we really have to have these continuous conversations as well. And lastly, explain from the student's perspective. Use the reasoning why. Use your students as to why they want this. What does it mean to them? And whenever you say that this is good for students, it's hard for people to argue with that statement. The data, but also when you want to use the students as that perspective, why my computer's acting that way, then they are the ones you are going to use, and people can't say no to their students as well. And nobody wants that look, but it's very important because you're there for the students. So why aren't you responding to what the students want? So my final thoughts are the following. I like to keep things short and brief, but these are my 4 tips. Affinity spaces are a place for students and adults of color to be their authentic selves. This is for you to be authentic for who you are and how you want to show up. Also, affinity spaces reflect the intersectionality, and they are very important for those pieces as well. Do your research before starting a group. You don't want to fall into those rut sets to thinking, oh, this kid is Muslim when they really are not, or trying to identify a student before you get to know them. Do the research. If you don't have that research in your schools, try to find a way for you to be able to get that information as well. Admin approval provides you with the needed support always. If you get admin approval and support, then you're golden, and I wouldn't worry about the rest. Don't do this alone. Find peer support, reach out to the experts or those in the field. Please feel free to reach out to me, and I have other colleagues as well who can help you with this as you continue to move on. One last thing, one of my favorite people that I like to follow is Melinda French Gates, or she's going by Melinda French right now. And why it's so important for our female students, whether they are Arab or whether they're Muslim. And it's not because, we're doing this whole excluding the boys from the whole conversation, but to me, it's a very personal thing, also being a mom of 3 girls. A woman with a voice is by definition a strong woman, but the search to find that voice can be remarkably difficult. That also resonates with me. I haven't always had my voice, but I've always had amazing mentors and amazing strong women around me who helped me find my voice. And I hope you're able to use affinity groups and the research you had and the information you got from this session today in order for you to help your students become strong women and help them find their voice. Thank you for attending. And I just want to end off by saying, again, you can find me at Linktree, and this session will be on Linktree as well. And if you have any questions, need a thought partner, feel free to reach out. And that is my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thank you, Dr. Alexander, for having me here today.
Love it. No problem. So we do have a question from the chat, and then I'm going to open up the mic For anyone that has a question, all I ask you to do is unmute yourself and wait for me to say your name. So that way we're not talking over each other. Any comments or questions, you can hop on the mic. But the question we have to start with is, have you been able to use academic data to defend what you are doing?
That's a good question. So with the limited academic data that I have, yes, I have been able to use it. The main organizations that I lean on are CARE, which is the Council of American and Islamic Relations, because they're also always at the forefront whenever these issues arise, and ISPU, the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, because they have the data, especially when it comes to Muslim students and bullying. And when you use that, there's a very important statistic that ISPU has brought out, that religious bullying is very common in schools among students who are Muslim and also Jewish, but also 25% of that bullying, unfortunately, comes from adults in the classroom. So when you use those type of statistics and data, schools are like, okay, number one thing schools don't ever want to be is on the news. And number two, they don't want to be in a lawsuit. Not to say that also that they aren't looking for the best interest of their students, but also they have so much that they want to do. They want to make sure that they're reflective. So yes, I have used the data. And those are the two main groups that I lean on. And like I said in my session, there's also not a lot, because people can't get past the fact that Muslims being so ethnically diverse, how are they going to use that data, and how are they going to collect the data with something that's so intersectional? And so once that continues, and this is why I'm doing the work that I'm doing, is so people understand that it's not a one box or one size fits all for all of our students. But thank you for the question.
Mona.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Abeer, thank you so much. I really learned so much from this discussion. All the facts that you gave us are so useful. The question I had, because I am interested in starting an affinity group in the school I'm at right now, do you have a specific name for the group, and like what times were you usually meeting and how often?
Good questions. So the affinity group name, I always leave it up to the girls. When I am doing sending a proposal to a school, I just keep it very generic and call it Affinity Group for Muslim and Arab Female Students. That way it could fall under a larger umbrella. So I let the students pick their name if they wanted to, because I want it to be personal to them. When we meet is based on the facilities that the school can give me. So the two schools that I'm working with right now, very different. One school, I meet only Wednesday morning from 8 to 8:30 during their SEL sessions, which doesn't really give me a lot of time. But when I have only 30 minutes, what I end up doing is then I'll meet a lot more with that group. The other group, they have an after school bus. So I was able to meet with the girls after school on Thursdays for about an hour and a half. And we had our sessions then after school, and they provided a facility as well. So depending on what the school is able to give you based on their timing. And also it could get very difficult for students to meet after school. So sometimes trying to find a time during the school year is beneficial, but then that would be something that you would agree on with the school. I think those were your 3 questions or 2 questions. Did I miss one?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome. So Gregory's asking, are there any major things not to say to Muslim or Arab female students that we tend to not know about? That's a really good question. One of the most important factors when you're dealing with Muslims in general is proximity and space. Just as in other religions, females and males in Islam don't touch if they are not related. So a handshake or a hug or, a nudge is something you want to be very careful about, because that's not a common practice among those who are observant, who are Muslim. Now, if they're Arab Christian or Arab of another faith, that's a different story. But for Muslim females, keep proximity in mind. You also don't want to open up about topics that could be very personal to a female student herself. Those are sometimes more comfortable spoken to with another Muslim female or another female as well. So those are concepts that we don't talk about. We don't do dating. We don't do things like that. So those are who are observant as well. So topics that can be very personal and dealing with the opposite sex are some things that you probably would want to avoid. But everything else is pretty much, open, but also keep the physical proximity in mind when you're dealing with Muslim females. And if you are a non-Muslim female dealing with Muslim males, pretty much the same concept. Now, everybody's different. I shake hands. I do all of that. I have some friends who don't. So it really just depends. You could ask or just, err on the side of caution and just not do it as well.
Thank you so much for this session. It was very, very informative. And I love that you not only gave us the information, but broke it down into different sections. So I completely appreciate that. And the fact that you answered questions and made everyone feel comfortable about asking whatever they needed to ask. This was such an informative session that I feel like every educator should watch. So thank you so much for not only giving the presentation, but also giving the resource that they can go back and really look at it. I mean, just thank you tremendously. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Alexandra. This has been great, and I appreciate those who attended on a Saturday.